So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, peace be upon you all, and welcome to another Q&A session in the evolution course right after our primary session. Please remember to subscribe to the course. It's free, it's in the ticker. And also, I would suggest that you subscribe to the Telegram channel for instant notifications, because I really don't want to keep depending on the YouTube algorithm to notify people. It doesn't seem to me that it is doing this job properly. Salam everybody. If you have questions, you have two options. You can write them on the chat, and you can actually even come on board to the platform with me and share your ideas about what we have just seen. So I'm going to put now the StreamYard link in the live chat, and I'm going to even pin it. So here you go. You have it. And you can hop in. Just please, when you're logging in, write your first name so that I don't need to call you. Just write your first name or the name you'd like me to call you, to make it easier in the communication. Or just if you don't want to come live, you can just still put your question in the live chat. So yeah. I'm pinning now the StreamYard link. Here you go. So you can actually click the StreamYard link and come along and give your thoughts about this or ask questions if you'd like. If there are no questions, we'll cut this short, but I would rather actually have another nice interactive session as we had last time. Let me remove this comment about starting now, because we actually started. Okay, so let's see. Salam again from Man's Man. Somebody's asking if I'm right now in North America. Big man. No, I'm right now not in North America. Okay, so what are your questions? You have the StreamYard link. Come on board, ask your questions if you'd like. Don't be shy. Be grateful is key, says Ahmed. Many thanks for all your efforts and insightful presentations. Thank you, my brother. Yes, and being grateful is actually key. And the whole thing is that when we see these things, it helps us to be grateful, really. Because this is, in my opinion, why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, part of it. I cannot say exactly why Allah says something, but I think that part of it, when He says, سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق أولم يكفي بربك أنه على كل شيء شهيد. We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it is evident or obvious to them that it is the truth. Isn't it enough that your Rabb, your Lord, is witness over everything? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is witness over everything, including what's happening on the molecular level inside of us, dear brothers and sisters. And He's telling us, go and look in the horizons and inside yourselves, because when you do that, you will see that it is the truth. His existence is the truth, His sustenance is the truth, His book is the truth, because in His book He asks us to look there to find Him. Yeah. I have a question from Man's Man. It says, I've been thinking about the stream with Professor Al-Ta'i. Since we do not know the volition of Allah, is it a mercy that Allah is generally consistent with how He enacts the natural laws? So he says, so that we mere mortals have a chance to make sense of something. Okay, so I have an insight that I can share with you about that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, والذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام ثم استوى على العرش. He is the one who has created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and then took the throne. This is the way I like to translate its meaning. And in my humble opinion, the meaning of taking the throne, when a king takes the throne, it means that things in his kingdom are in order. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates a kingdom that is in order. And for order to exist, there needs to be laws of nature. Because if there are no laws of nature, we cannot live in this way. If you are not sure that when object A hits object B, then you can calculate the result. You cannot create projectiles, you cannot create machines, you cannot create wheels, you cannot create cars, you cannot create computers, you cannot create anything because we cannot expect the behavior of anything that we create. And then this life will not be livable. This is number one. And number two, since this life is a test, things must have causal order. And when there is causal order, some people will lie to themselves and say that causes are self-creating and self-sustaining, and others will look at what we have seen today in the primary session and say, even with the causes and effects, for causes and effects to be arranged in this magnificent order, it can only be the product of a designer. So Allah creates this order of things and then uses his power to create those magnificent systems that are not only enormously complex and cannot exist except by a designer, but can only exist with a designer who understands every single bit of those laws and can exploit them to the maximum to be able to create inside the cell, inside the nucleus of the cell, on top of the DNA material that's very minuscule, those unbelievably small molecular machines that act in this unbelievably magnificent way. And anybody with a brain in his head, okay, can only find the inference that, number one, the creator of those laws that can cause this intricacy to exist is an extremely wise creator that has proportioned everything. وكل شيء عنده بمقدار. Everything with him is in proportion. So the laws of the nature are fine-tuned. To have such sophisticated machines that are causal, you can only have this with laws of nature that are extremely fine-tuned. And this is what is hitting chemists and physicists and astrophysicists all the time. And when you know that the underlying quantum world makes it difficult for this to occur, you understand two things. Number one, that for the quantum world to work with the macro world, and this still happens, you need not only Allah the creator, Allah al-Bari and Allah al-Khaliq, you need Allah the sustainer. Because otherwise this would have collapsed. So you have duality in this world. You have causal order, and you have causal order, and you have continuous intervention in the same time. The causal order makes us able to live in a predictable universe, and the continuous intervention and continuous sustenance means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control all the time at the fundamental level. And this to me is a great insight of his name, Al-Latif. Al-Latif can be translated as the subtle. Okay? He is controlling things at the most fundamental, subtle level. So that on the macro level, we can live in a causally ordered universe. And on the fundamental level, everything is really in his hand. And then we can understand ayat that He is the one who sends the rain. He is the one who sends lightning bolts. He is the one, because for rain to occur, it needs very intricate electrical and mechanical reactions in the clouds. And those are quantum reactions. For these things to work in our DNA, those are molecular and atomic level events that can go this way or go that way. If they go the other way, you will get a disease. If they go the other way, you will be healthy. At the fundamental level, if they go this way or that way, from our perspective on the macro level, it is okay. The science predicts it because our science is statistical in nature. I want you to understand this point. Our science is statistical in nature, but the individual events are subtle in nature. You see what I mean? If somebody gets a cancer or doesn't get a cancer, science will say it's okay. But who specifically gets the cancer? The calculations say that much percentage under this kind of sunlight exposure, that much percentage of the people will get skin cancer. So the percentage will always look causally driven. But who gets the cancer is at the subtle level, which event takes place at which individual. Allah is in full control of His universe at every single point of time. But we are comfortably observing this universe at every single point of time, and we don't see the intervention. So He is Al-Latif Al-Khabir from one point. He is Al-Latif Al-Khabir from one point, and He is the one, أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِ بِرَبِّكَ أَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ, from the other point. And on the other side of the formula, we are observing, and He is telling us, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. He is telling us, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقَ. So, in my humble opinion, this is how this universe is working. And this is how you can reconcile that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of everything, single aspect and every single detail at every single point of time, and still our rules and our formulas, our predictions will work on the statistical level. And people who are not engineers, or who are not medical doctors, or who are even not physicists or chemists, engineers and medical doctors will be the people who fully understand this if they use their mind, if they open their heart and use their mind. Okay, because by education they understand the statistical nature of the laws of the world that we live in. Okay, chemists and physicists, those who open both their minds and hearts and look to the effects of this form or of their formulas on the ground, will immediately understand this. Deniers will never understand if you shout in front of your face and put the truth in front of your face, in front of their face 100 times in a second. Because if you look the other way, if you look the other side, no way I can show you. You're not looking. Yeah. Subhanallah, man says, MashaAllah, I still feel like physicists appeal to the causality in the quantum as a cop-out. We simply can't see any smaller because our tools are too big and cumbersome at that small scale. It is not true that there is a causality on the quantum level. The quantum level is completely causal. But you have to refer to what I have just said. Everything in our world is statistical. I'll give you an example. Let me give you this example. One of the very well-known quantum effects is radiation. Okay, so you get, for example, or decay of radioactive materials. Okay, that causes radioactivity. So you get an unstable atom or an unstable nucleus like uranium or plutonium, and it disintegrates. It splits up from a heavier element to lighter elements. This event is a quantum event. Decay is a quantum event. Particle decay is a quantum event. For each individual nucleus in each individual atom, you do not know if the next instant it will decompose or it will not. It will decay or it will not. will split into two different atoms, or you cannot know. But because the whole process on the statistical level is predictable, you know that if you get 1 kilogram of plutonium or 1 kilogram of uranium, after how much time half of it would have decomposed, and we call this the half-life of the material. The half-life of the material is measured in seconds or minutes or hours or days or years, according to how long-lasting it is. So this is similar to what I have said. So irrespective of the fact that we do not know when each atom will decompose, half-life periods will always work on the statistical level. So we are living in a world that we can use, for example, radioactive materials for our applications, whether it is whatever, nuclear propulsion, nuclear energy production, or even nuclear weapons. We can use them. We know how to use them. They're very dangerous. And if they are not predictable, if we cannot calculate a critical mass, then nuclear weapons will blow up in our faces. But we do exactly do the calculations, and the calculations work. And that's why we can use nuclear energy. So again, to the example that I was mentioning, on the individual level, my brothers, on the individual level, okay, things are calculated individually by Allah, are controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the statistical level, He maintains the statistical averages so that we can live in a livable universe. What exactly happens in the quantum world is very difficult to understand, and maybe we will never understand. But those two facts remain coexistent. Oh man. So be grateful is key. Says, which Muslim scientists do you think are lacking in the Ummah? Do we have scientists like Dr. James too? Or if not, what do you think is the reason? Okay. This is a very good question. We have scientists in the Muslim Ummah that are not willing to risk their careers. This is the problem. We have speakers in the Muslim Ummah that care about their following. How many people are following them on YouTube? We have very few who understand this, who could do presentations like the one I am doing. I'm an engineer, for God's sake. I'm an engineer for Allah's sake. I'm not a biochemist. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. It took me enormous effort to study and go through the literature and be able to talk comfortably about this. Somebody who has spent his life in biochemistry, somebody who has spent his life in biology, somebody who has spent his life in microbiology, in molecular biology, in cell biology, in systems biology, can do this presentation very well. Better than me, probably, and easier than me, and with less preparation. But they're not doing it. Why are they are not doing it? Why do you think they're not? They're afraid. Unfortunately. It's miserable. It's miserable. Unfortunately. No comment, really. We have people who are working, Muslims who are working everywhere. Many times, even on my channel chats and sometimes on the private chats, some will be sending me messages. Go ahead. And I find they are scientists in those fields. And I tell them, why don't you come to the platform and tell people? Because it will be more impactful when people in the field are doing it. It is not a coincidence that I can find Christian scientists who are willing to come to the platform and explain this to people on my platform or on other platforms. But I cannot find Muslim scientists who are willing to do it. What's the problem with you guys? What's the problem with you? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you this knowledge. And you know the truth. And you're not willing to come out and say it. You are leaving your Muslim brothers and sisters, okay, getting indoctrinated with the nonsense of Darwinism in schools. Evolutionary Darwinism in schools. Evolutionary physics. Evolutionary chemistry. Evolutionary biology. Evolutionary, you name it. Okay? Telling them that natural random events have created the universe, created the stars, created the planets, created the first biochemical compounds, created life, evolved life from single cell to more complex single cell to multicellular organisms to sexually reproducing organisms, animals and plants, and then evolved ape-like creatures to humans. You are letting them study that consciousness is an illusion and that we are machines and that all of this is an illusion. You are letting them study this nonsense and you don't want to come out. And when some people publish books that say that evolution is okay with Islam, you're closing your mouth and you're not speaking. Wake up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold you accountable to this. He will hold you accountable that an engineer has to go and do your work. It's miserable. Because at one day, I saw my children coming to me and telling me, Dad, they are teaching us in school that evolution is what has evolved creatures. And I couldn't bear it. Okay? I couldn't bear it. I could have just explained to them, I called it a day, and I did. But then I thought, what about all the Muslim kids and the Muslim youth who are becoming atheists every day because they are being told that 99 point something % of the scientists in the world agree that everything is evolution, which is not a correct statistic. But what about the others who know and are closing it, are zipping it, because they are afraid of their tenure or whatever? This is a miserable state of affairs, unbelievable, and unacceptable. Subhanallah. Management says, I think I know whom Brother Ahmad is referring to, but don't say. Elias says, honestly, I think as an engineer, you might be in a better position to talk about it. Thank you, brother. Actually, sorry for getting emotional, number one. And number two, I would really encourage you to watch an episode that I have in the On Evolution series. I think it's On Evolution 12. And in it, I just tell the story why I'm doing this. Yes, it is On Evolution 12. And I think, yes, engineers and medical doctors are in a very good position to explain these things because we understand how design looks. But what I'm not saying is that evolutionary biology, any person with two eyes in his head, a brain in his skull, and a heart in his chest, and a soul in his heart, when he sees those things in this 1 hour that we have spent together, will immediately say, Subhanallah, this is clear and obvious design. What about those who have spent their lives studying it? And that's why I have this other series, which is called Marvels of Creation, that I bring medical doctors on board. So I had my respected friend, Dr. Amr Arafa, explaining orthopedics, and Dr. Ahmed Gum'a explaining ophthalmology, how the eye works. Whether on the micro or the macro or the nano or the cosmic level, it's designed everywhere. And then we have people who are coming out and say, yes, evolution is okay. You can be a Muslim and accept evolution. No, Muslims don't accept nonsense, whether evolution or anything else. Yeah. Man's man says, seek knowledge and then you have attained it. When you have attained it, teach. Yeah, I agree with you. I just would have liked that those who have studied it as a career would do so too. Would I have to come to the platform and teach people, guys. So Allah will give you barakah in what you have learned, and He will protect you from what you are afraid of. You're just saying the truth. Be grateful is key. Says comparing your style with others, you are great in explaining things easily without over complicating. Thank you, my brother. Elias says sometimes when people are around something for a long time, they take it for granted. But someone like an engineer who knows the difficulty of creating a functioning system with microscopic parts. I don't believe if anybody sees this a million times, in the millionth time he will say it's just normal, it happened by random. It's impossible. And I have shown you, I have intentionally designed the session this way. I start from the upper level, which looks amazingly complex, and then I go down one more level. It looks even more crazily complex. I go down one more level. It looks unbelievably complex. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. We know the tip of the iceberg. You see those small components coming into the intake of the RNA polymerase and getting stitched together. And how do they come here? Why are they coming? Why they are pouring? There are mechanisms on top of mechanisms on top of mechanisms that is directing the whole thing. This is unbelievable. And somebody like Dr. Tour, who comes to the channel and says this and puts his lifelong career at stake, and he goes out willingly saying, I love Jesus, and I'm doing it for the love of God, and I'm explaining to people that abiogenesis is nonsense because I'm a biochemist and I want to explain to people. Why are you Muslim scientists not doing it? Be grateful is key. Saying, actually, I came across your channel after having seen a Shaib Malik stream, and your presentations made much more sense to me. Thank you, brother. Yes, and Dr. Shaib is not a biologist, by the way. He's not a biologist. He studied chemistry, yes, but he is making those parables and those parallels between the Quran and evolution that are evolution is false, and his parallels are false. I have discussed with him in writing, and then I asked him very, very nicely to come and have a discussion about his ideas on the theological, philosophical, and scientific basis. And he just wouldn't. And I have issued this short video a week ago, and I'm waiting for his response. If he doesn't respond and come to do a nice discussion about his ideas, I will write and I will deconstruct his book systematically. I think it is only appropriate to give him the chance for a fair discussion for the sake of Muslims who are watching his presentations, as you have mentioned. And sorry, Dr. Shaib, what you are saying is wrong. Evolution is wrong, and you are reconciling a false theory that is not fair. It should not be fairly called a theory. It is a failed hypothesis at the best. Okay. In my opinion, it's completely junk. It's not even good for a hypothesis. Okay, because it's unfalsifiable and untestable. So it does not qualify as a hypothesis in the first place. So you are advocating, trying to reconcile Islam, the ultimate truth, the undisputable truth, with a false hypothesis. What is this? Man's man says, why is it that someone like Dr. Tour is willingly putting himself out there? Yeah, because he thinks that it is his obligation as somebody who believes in God. Yes, we might differ with him on his creed, but this is a completely different topic. He says, I believe in God, and those people are going out there and saying that abiogenesis and evolution are proven science, and that we know how this or that, and they are deceiving people with what is not even scientifically agreed upon. and I'm going to take it on my shoulders to show. And he had a great impact. So why is he willingly doing it? I think because he cannot take it on his conscience to be a top chemist and just hear this nonsense being said, and he is doing it as a good deed to God. He is doing it as a good deed to God. What shall I say? يعني حسبه كذلك ولا أزكيه على الله كما نقول in Arabic. I think this is his motive, and I cannot judge what's in his heart, but Man's Man says maybe I should collaborate with Blogging Theology to promote the counter narrative. I have tried to contact Paul Williams, and the problem is I do not have an email for him, and I do not, and he doesn't respond. He has this. I think he doesn't even read his messages on Messenger. If somebody can reach him, I'm very happy to collaborate with him. He has had Dr. Shaib on his channel. Dr. Shaib is very good in going into interviews where he is not challenged. Okay, this is right. You should also put, if you are putting out controversial positions, you should put your position at the test of a debate. If somebody knows how to contact Paul Williams, I'm happy to have to come to his platform or to any other platform that will proclaim the truth. Thank you. He says, my appearance on Dawah was the best. I'm happy to go to others. Man's Man says, then what does what does that say about the Muslims who keep silent? To be honest with you, either they think that it's either they think that it's okay to leave other Muslims think of this nonsense, or they look the other side and don't intentionally look to people who are turning atheist because they think that nature is self-sufficient, or they are I don't know what to say, too scared to speak out. It is one of the drawbacks. It is one of the drawbacks of being dependent on the atheist ecosystem. So we know that evolutionary biology and cosmology are two main areas where existential questions are. Okay, so if this is a little advice for people who would like to go into those fields. If you are going to go on into those fields, have a message to learn the truth and then advocate the truth. Because if you are not going to do it, just look into some other field and don't stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is going to get worse. And indoctrination about evolution is going to get worse day after day. And wait until this comes to the Muslim countries' syllabuses taught in schools and universities, and see what will be the impact in those countries. And when those little students will look out, they will not find scientists in their country speaking against it. And when they look out for Muslim scientists, they will not find Muslim scientists speaking against it. And they can only find Christian scientists or scientists from other religions. Man's Man says, question about the RNA that gets transcribed by the roller coaster. Yeah, the RNA polymerase. What happens to this strand once it enters the cytoplasm? Or this will be covered in future sessions. So the first thing that happens to it when it enters the cytoplasm is what we have seen in the end of the session. So the first thing that happens to it is the splicing. And the splicing process is an amazing process. And we are going almost to dedicate the next session to it, because this matter of introns and extrons, and you see how the spliceosomes will go and find the interface points and then cut the introns and wrap them together in loops and throw them away, and then stitch the introns together to form the what's called mature RNA. And this mature RNA can now be translated into proteins. And different configurations of mature RNA can be produced from the same unprocessed or premature RNA. So this is the first thing that happens. And then there are processes that might degrade the RNA if it's defective. And then there is the transcription process. And then the RNA itself can essentially be a machine. So RNA can also be folded into a machine, like a ribosome, for example. So you have ribosomal RNA. You have something called transfer RNA that we will see, because transfer RNA is what carries the amino acids. So you will find those transporters that are carrying amino acids on them, and then they go into the ribosome, and then the ribosome will be reading the RNA, and then each transfer RNA will attach to a certain codon. So they will go and codon by codon, transfer RNA by transfer RNA. When it attaches, then the amino acid that it's carrying becomes the next amino acid in the chain. And then you will find the ribosome stitching together the amino acids, and then amino acid by amino acid, they form something called a polypeptide chain, which essentially gets shaped into a 3D shape, which is what we call a protein. And some enzymes can share in this process, and then those proteins can be enzymes themselves to catalyze other reactions. And then they can come together and get assembled with other RNAs or with other proteins to form machines like the ones that we have seen. And then those machines will perform functions. And then sometimes you have proteins or that are big, that are then transported over motor proteins that we have seen before, and they are taken, and there are some transformations that happen inside Golgi apparatus, etc. So it's a long story until you eventually reach to proteins that come into protein complexes. And this is what we are going to do through the remaining parts of the central dogma. It's an unbelievable journey that has rightfully been described by our brother Elias here as it brings tears to your eyes. Man says, I'm honestly glad I took physics and chemistry instead of biology. I'd rather learn it from you instead of a secular curriculum. Thank you, my friend. The thing is, guys, I really would like you to share this with your families and with your young ones. If they are going to international schools, or if you are living in the West, or if you are living even in an Islamic country that's teaching this nonsense about random mutations and evolution causing this, show them this. They will not show them the intricate details in the book. You just tell them this happens and it developed through random mutation over time and natural selection, fixed it, etc. So we have to share this with the young ones, and bring more people to subscribe this course and send questions beforehand if you would like. Elias, I have a question. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Post your question. Yeah, you can just post your question on the live chat, Elias. It's okay. I'm waiting for it. I will need to keep this below 1 hour. So, yeah, Elias says, from my understanding, DNA is the ingredient. What tells the DNA where to go and when. DNA is the ingredients, right? What tells the DNA where to go and when. Okay. So DNA itself, DNA is a recipe. Okay. DNA is a recipe. And yeah, and so if you want, for example, to make a protein, like for example, our eyes has a lens, and the lens has a material, for example, called crystalline. That is a kind of protein that is a transparent crystalline. So the recipe to create this protein is coded in the DNA. And then your question is very correct. So there is a system that is sitting on top of the DNA that is telling the cell when to produce the recipe. Okay. So this we saw, if you go back to the episode, to the session, to the primary session we have just seen, you go to the first part and you will see the signaling. It says, yes, recipe, like what certain cells, like skin cells, hey, you need to wait and come together at this. Yeah. So for example, you will have pigments produced in a place like skin, different components produced in different places of the body. So you have, number one, you have a system sitting on top of the DNA, which is the epigenetic system that we saw in part 1 and part 2. That tells, number one, it can inhibit, it can disable part of the DNA and enable other part of the DNA. And it's not just on off. Sometimes you have the same gene occurring many times in the DNA. And then it will shut down some of it, or enable all of it, or make it very accessible. So for example, some products are not needed except in the brain, or in the liver, or in the heart, or in the muscles, or in the bones. Okay, you need specific fibers in the bones, because those bones are actually living cells, but they look like rocky, they look like stone, because the DNA in them will produce those fibers that will trap calcium. So they look like the way they look. Okay, so you have this epigenetic layer, and the epigenetic layer is itself those histones, those proteins where the DNA gets trapped. The histones themselves are proteins. So it's a crazy loop of interlocked interactions. So the DNA is transcribed to produce histones, and then the histones become the core around which DNA is wrapped, and then there are tails, and then there's methylation of the tails. The whole system is irreducibly complex, and if any part, imagine that we don't have the epigenetic system, so the DNA is being expressed all over the body. So immediately you will find your skin, for example, producing the fibers that are needed in the bones, for example. Imagine what will happen if this is happening. But the same cell can become a neuron in the brain. Look how very different it is. Or a bone cell in your femur, or in your wrist. Imagine this. It's the same DNA material producing this cell or that cell. And there is another process on top of that we have seen in the beginning of the last episode, that the DNA is there, and a specific gene is enabled by the epigenetic layer, but nothing is happening. Why? Because for this gene to produce the protein, you need the transcription factor. You remember in the beginning of the last session, it said that in eukaryotes there is 1,000 different transcription factor. You remember this thing that went in the promoter and stood there and then got clicked active, and then the roller coaster starts? There is 1,000, actually 1,500 types of this complex. Each one is different from the other, and each one is specific to a certain promoter. Hence, this specific transcription factor is the only way for that gene to get expressed. And this specific transcription factor will be assembled, its components will be assembled in the cytoplasm of the cell outside of the nucleus when that cell receives a signal from outside of the cell to produce the pathway that will generate. You remember in the beginning of the session, the pathway that will generate the phosphorylation of different proteins, and then they form into complexes, and they get the password or the markers that will enable them to pass through the nuclear pores. And then you need to think, why do they go to the nucleus in the first place? Why do they look for the nuclear pore and go in the first place? The whole thing, we don't understand how this works. Okay, and then you need to think, why did some other cell send a signal to that cell? Who is the orchestrator on top of all of this? And you will find ridiculous explanations, because the real explanation is that we do not know. And the big problem is that the more we try to know, we understand one thing and we open 10 more questions. We try to answer one of the 10 more questions, we open 100 questions. That's why when I was having this interview with Dr. James Stewart, I would recommend for everyone to look for it on the channel and see it. And he tells me, Ahmed, we will never know probably. And I tell him, why, Dr. Tur, you say? He says, because he says, the more we learn, the more we understand that there are much, much more questions opening, to the extent the more time passes, the more we know less versus the number of open questions. So now we have 10 questions, we have one answer. So we don't know 90%. Tomorrow there will be 1,000 questions, and we will know not one answer, we will know 10, but it will be 10 out of 1,000 versus 1 out of 10. So today we know maybe 10%, tomorrow maybe 1%, the next day we know 0.1%. This is how it's going. For example, he explained something about a topic called the interactome, and we just know so little. We know so little. By the way, I will be doing, hopefully, inshallah, a marvelous and magnificent series with Dr. Fazal Rana, or Faz Rana, starting the 3rd of Feb. I will be announcing it soon. And Dr. Faz is somebody who I have interviewed before, and he is a biochemist, so we'll be doing a detailed series about the marvels that are there on the molecular biology level. Okay. I wished I had not only Dr. Fazrana, I wished I had 10 Muslim microbiologists and biochemists and cell biologists, system biologists, etc., coming to me telling me, we want to do it with you. We don't have. Yeah. So I hope I have answered your question. There are layers over layers over layers of control. Layers over layers over layers. And every day we learn more about more layers. Man says it's also amazing that this blind DNA can somehow also tell what limbs to grow in 3D space. Yeah, this is another layer. So this is called developmental it's called evolution. They like to stick the word evolution in everything. So it's called Devo. Evolutionary development. Okay? And evolutionary development is mentioned in the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks a lot in the Quran about the development of the embryo. Okay? Into a fetus, into a human being eventually, and how he proportions him. So there are unbelievable mechanisms. Maybe we will reach that at a point, because it is a huge challenge to the evolutionary theory, that are called DGRNs. Okay, developmental genetic regulatory networks. Okay, those DGRNs are circuits. They are like electronic circuits, actually, that are thought to be in control of the development of not only the genetic system, but also directing the development of embryos in a way, a very, very complicated way, and there are substances called morphogens, etc., that will spread in the body and will be signals to the cells to morph in a specific way. But we only understand a very small piece of it. We only understand a very, very small piece of it. But what we understand is that it is very sophisticated, and that if mutation happens to it, you lose the creature completely, and it has to come hardwired. And it is one of the topics that makes really the whole Darwinian point of view really totally ridiculous and total nonsense. And I had it discussed in one of the, I discussed it with one evolutionary biologist actually in one of those debates. I think it was with Jackson Wheat. So I think that was in the debate about the Cambrian explosion, and I mentioned that, and as usual, no satisfactory response. You don't expect to get satisfactory responses when the answer to every question. This is the episode I'm talking about. Is the Cambrian explosion a problem for evolution? And in that I brought up developmental gene regulatory networks. I would recommend that everybody would actually even have a look on it, and I think it will be of benefit. And I would really recommend you guys to look at this series that I'm doing with Dr. Ahmed Goma. I had the third installment the Sunday before yesterday, and probably will do another installment about how we see colors. So we initially looked into the anatomy of the eye, and then the function of the eye, and then how we see 3D images, which was the last one, and then probably the fourth one will be about how we see colors, and look at the magnificence of God's creation. It's called Marvels of Creation series. And I also invite you to follow the Quranic Marvel series that is happening every other Tuesday with Dr. Basil Tawfiq. And tomorrow we have another installment about the science of insects and how the Quran addresses the matter of insects in a very marvelous and miraculous way. I think it will be very much fun. Man's Man says, like, how does DNA even say head grow here, then says legs grow at the other end? It must somehow understand and perceive spatial coordinates. Yeah, obviously DNA does not understand anything. The designer of the whole system. And there is a theory, for example, that Dr. Tour is a proponent of, is that DNA does not have all the information. Maybe even not the majority of the information. Maybe even a very small piece of the information. I will tell you an insight and conclude this episode. He goes like this, and in my discussion with him, I actually mentioned an ayah in the Quran, and he agreed with me. So he says the water in the cell. This is actually the interview I had with Dr. James Tour. You can look it up on the channel and see it. If you get a cell and you dehydrate the cell, so everything is there, every other thing is there. Just dehydrate the cell. You kill it by dehydration, and then you rehydrate the cell. You cause it to absorb new water. It will not come back to life. It will not come back to life. And his explanation to this theory is, or his hypothesis is, that there is information in the water in the cell. The configuration of the water in the cell is carrying a huge amount of information. And the reason for this is that water molecules have this feature of having sort of electromagnetic forces, weak electromagnetic forces on the molecular level called van der Waals forces. And so those configurations of the water molecules can actually store energy. Store information. And there is also the interactome. And his idea is that it's not only the DNA, because as you say, the DNA, we know that the DNA is just producing products. The DNA is a very complicated set of recipes and a control system for the production of those recipes, and a pyramid of control systems on top of each other. But to create a 3D shape of a body and to direct it, there is something else. There's something else that's happening, it's for sure. And this something else is much, much more complex versus the DNA. Another thing, by the way, we only understand for the human genome, we understand what 1.5% of it is doing. The rest, we don't have an idea what it's doing. And what evolutionary dudes were saying is that it's junk. They called it junk. What nonsense. And they just kept calling it junk DNA until a project called the ENCODE project uh, happened. And they had this criteria. If something is junk, then it doesn't make sense that it's transcribed. Now you understand what transcribed means. Okay? So if the cell goes through all that trouble to transcribe something, it means that it's not junk. So what they discovered is that 80%, we understand only 1.5%, okay, which produces the human proteins, for example, and the human RNAs that are needed for the machinery. So they found that 80% of the DNA is transcribed. 80%. But guess what? They don't understand what the transcribed products do. This is the level of knowledge that we have and the level of nonsense that is produced by evolutionary biologists who know. And then the ENCODE project was attacked, but day after day, they understand what the transcribed material does. It opens more questions. We know that we know less and less and less every day, but the arrogance continues and the nonsense continues. It's a miserable state of affairs. Like the introns that I have showed you in the introduction to splicing, they thought it was he said it's intragenic and it's intragenic junk. It's not junk. Yeah, Elias says again, my friend who's watching just messaged me. He made an incredible point. Evolution depends on errors. Why is the cell removing errors? Absolutely, my friend. Absolutely, my friend. Please watch episodes, session 2 of this course. I'm talking about errors, and in this central dogma, part 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, error correction is everywhere for Allah's sake. Man's is junk because in their arrogance they think whatever they don't understand is not meant to be understood. It's more than that actually, man's man, because the whole paradigm is that it's random. So if you if you have a paradigm where randomness is driving everything, a prediction is that the majority of the stuff will be junk. Okay? And then when it was discovered that it was not junk, look at the hypocrisy and the bigotry. Okay? Then they say, wow, it must also be not junk, because if it was junk, then energy conservation and saving energy would have caused natural selection to rule junk out. So we should have thought that it must not be junk if it still existed. You know what's the truth? The truth is that you have people who are filled up with hypocrisy and bigotry, that when you don't know, you find an explanation that is actually nonsense. When you know that it's completely the opposite, you put another explanation that it's again nonsense. Okay? Why? It's nonsense both ways, because you think that the fundamental paradigm is that randomness is driving it. And it's not randomness. Wake up and come to your senses and stop teaching nonsense to people, because this false paradigm of yours that starts from the initiation of the universe until the human consciousness and human soul, okay, and calling people machines and calling people having the illusion of consciousness, all of this will eventually fall down. Okay, it will fall down eventually. Elias says, and then after ENCODE, they said, well, of course, it's not junk. Natural selection gets it. Yeah, I'm just saying that. Lol, they want their cake and eat it too. Absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone, I wanted this to finish at 1 hour. Please share it with your loved ones. Thank you for being here, and spread the truth. If the ones who are teaching and learning this are not spreading the truth, let us share the truth. Just get out a piece of paper now, write a list of 20 or 30 people, and send them a note about this course and about the channel. And my channel is not monetized. My interest is to spread the truth. Thank you very much. Barakallahu feekum. Elias says, Barakallahu feek, Barakallahu feek, akhi. And May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all, and Allahumma بلغنا رمضان بارك لنا في رجب وشعبان. I give you all, myself first and all of you, to start purifying your hearts, because we are going into the best season of Rajab, Sha'ban, and Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive my and your sins. Ameen. Man's when I have these sessions when I'm actually up to fetch them. Thank you, my friend. But you take the time to spread. May Allah give you, my friend, peace and happiness, and everybody who is here. And inshallah, we meet all in Jannah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. I leave you in God's mercy, and I hope to see you tomorrow. And if you are not subscribed to the Arabic channel and you know Arabic, just subscribe. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.